and welcome to Woman Up, the podcast series by Desperate Artwives. I'm Susan Merrick. Today, I'm speaking to Nydia Blas. Nydia is a visual artist, originally from New York. She's recognised for her body of work entitled The Girls Who Spun Gold, a collection of images that resulted from a girl empowerment group that she founded after observing a lack of space and community for teen girls of African descent in Ithaca, New York. Her photographs have been published internationally, and in 2019 she was named One to Watch by the British Journal of Photography. Nydia is an assistant professor in the Department of Art and Visual Culture at Spelman College, Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome, Nydia.
Hi, thank you. Hi.
Hi, it's so good to talk to you.
Yes, you too. Thank you for asking me to have a conversation with you today.
You're so welcome, so welcome. So I came across your work, Nydia, and Amy and I wanted to approach you because we saw your work, The Girls Who Spun Gold, via a project called Women Picturing Revolution.
Yes. Yep.
So that's how I came across it. But so I've then done my own research, seen some of the work, which I'd like to go into a bit later. But first of all, would you mind giving the listeners a bit of a background into how you've got into photography, what your passion is, where it's come from?
Of course, yes. So I've been making photos since I was, I think, in 7th grade, which is a lot of years ago. I'm like over 25 years ago, I tell my students now. I was lucky to go to like an alternative middle high school that offered photography. So I feel like I just had this really early access to photography that it just sort of clicked and made sense to me. And thinking now about what I used to photograph when I was younger and what I photograph now, I've always photographed people that I know. And I've always been drawn to and interested in children, and adolescents. Let's see, when I graduated from high school, I left to study photography, but then ended up coming back home to start a family, and then returned to photography years later after I had my daughter, which is my second child, and returned to photo. I felt like it was sort of this irresponsible career or to try to chase after. I just felt like I was a mother and I had to be responsible, and photography, wouldn't pay my bills. And, but I couldn't, I guess, stay away from it. And, it's kind of led me on this really long journey of making art and education. And, where I just find myself now in this really super exciting place at Spelman. But I can go into any aspect of that more.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Mm-hmm. That makes me really excited about your work, but also your journey, especially. So the platform that these podcasts are on Desperate Artwives is, Amy set it up especially for women who were either artists already who'd had children and then were looking for new platforms, finding, talking in the way that you're talking, making these decisions based on, wow, now I'm a mother, how does that change how I work? How do I make that work, practically and all of these things. So it's really exciting to hear your journey in that way. If we go to one of your projects, so the one that I've spoken about already, Girls Who Spun Gold. Yeah. Could you tell me a bit about the background to that? So the girl empowerment group that you set up, and then why these images came out of that.
Yeah, I think The Girls Who Spun Gold is so interesting because it's really about me, and my experiences, as a child, as an adolescent, as a teenage mother, and as a woman, and also really very much about this connection to a group of girls. But what I would say binds us together is sort of growing up in the very specific place of Ithaca, New York, and sort of how we learn to navigate predominantly white space as girls of African descent. And so it's really a reflection of the time that I spent with the girls in the Girl Empowerment Group. So Southside Community Center in Ithaca, New York is really the only historical place for Black folks. Wow. And in between my undergraduate and graduate careers, I worked there for a bit of time, and I was lucky enough to meet this group of girls. I had kind of seen them around town or known their parents. Ithaca's small enough that you kind of know everybody, but really got to know them in sort of this intimate setting, and we became close. It was at a time where I was like going through transition. I was going through a divorce with my first husband and the father of my children. And then here I meet these teen girls, and somehow I think we really like filled these voids for each other. I was kind of like this person who was an adult, but not quite a parent, right? So it created this space for us to have a special kind of relationship in that way. But then also for me, I think that I was needing to just change and grow, and then had all this open space, right? Because I didn't really, my family wasn't functioning in the same way since I wasn't, I was going through the divorce. And so we just kind of like found each other and created this girl empowerment group, which was really about listening to them and all of the things that they kind of wanted to do. And then me kind of like sliding in sort of my educational stuff in these spaces to talk about self-esteem and race and gender. And we did things like we traveled to the Schomburg Center for Black Culture in Harlem and visited the Apollo. But we also like had, kept journals and talked about self-esteem. We deconstructed rap videos and the relationships between men and women. And and so when I went to school to get my graduate degree, I felt really bad about leaving them. I felt really guilty that I had formed this relationship, and now I pretty much felt selfish for having to leave to pursue my studies. And so as a way to maintain my bonds with them and also do my schoolwork, because we're talking about going to graduate school, which was an hour and a half away when I didn't drive, and being a mom, making a body of work, taking classes, working 2 jobs, then teaching. And so to maintain that connection with them, we would meet on the weekends. And I would bring to them what seemed like crazy concepts for photographs at the time. Yeah. And they really trusted me and really trusted that the work would become something, even when it was confusing sometimes at the times when we were making it.
It's really, really powerful work. And I think as an observer, it's you can see that you've obviously made this really close relationships with the women, with the girls, in order for you to be able to produce the work like that, produce those images, because you see almost really intimate relationships between the girls, or between yourself and the girls through the camera. Yeah, it's really beautiful. And
thank
you talking about the empowerment group, and then being able to leave that in order to pursue your education, but also kind of feeding all of that education back into it as well. I think not only inspiring, but it's more than that. It's the way you've described those kind of relationships, that kind of thing. It feels like it's just something that should be necessary for maybe all teenagers, especially teenage girls, incredible. That's a brilliant way to start a photography or restart a photography career.
Yes.
There's a quote that I came across, and it's on your website. I don't know, or if it's not on your website, it was somebody talking about your work, where it said that you are really good at making photos that are about girls dealing with their sexuality and coming to terms with it, but without making the images that are actually sexual, which you do. And that is such a skill. I suppose, why is it really important that they're not sexual? First question from me.
Yeah.
And then how do you manage that?
Yeah, that's so hard. So I think a lot of where that came from is really thinking about how and if it's possible to reclaim our bodies for ourselves. I think as girls, we learn so much that our bodies are about other people and about pleasing other people. And we don't really learn, we don't actually like learn about our bodies, like physically our bodies, but then we don't also learn in the same way that boys learn about their bodies as sort of a rite of passage, right? And that was one of the conversations that I had with the girls, is really like about their bodies and what do they look like, and investigating them, and on their behalf, that was, questions and stuff that they brought to me, conversations that they didn't feel like they could have with other adults. And so when I began making the work, I really started thinking about reclaiming the body for yourself. And then knowing that, like, visually, how do you do that? Because when we're talking about making photographs, and we're talking about making photographs of women, we're also really talking about the male gaze. And so how do you negate that or reject that was like a big question that I posed to myself. And I kind of left it an open question because I'm like, is that even possible to do? And so I think a lot in the images, I really thought about, like, I think it's some things, because it's a multitude of things, because I wanted to make images that spoke to sexuality, but that didn't feel sexual. And so I think one of the things I had to do in that was like to create this world where it felt like it was just about the people in it, so that they're not even like really engaging with the viewer, even though they are looking back at you sometimes and saying that I see you looking at me. But I really wanted to create spaces where it looked like they were just enjoying their own world for themselves, which I don't think girls and women get to do, and especially Black girls and women get to do. And so some of that was about protection. So I think I try to move back and forth with things. I think that's where a lot of the pairing comes from. More than one girl in an image is this like protection over your sister, right? Or over another person, but also really thinking about, if I pair an image that may feel or look more sexual, like there's an image with a girl with gold running down her legs. Yeah. I pair that then in exhibition or in sequence with another image that would be, a girl holding a baseball bat or something. So I was really thinking about not just singular images, but also how they work together, and how, really posing that question of if that's even possible to do, visually.
Absolutely. I would like to ask a bit more about your process, which kind of links on from that in terms of thinking about, who your subjects are and how you set them up, where you take your photographs. Where do you? You don't look like you use studios. You look like you use. You go to spaces.
Yes.
What's that process? How do you do that?
So with the Girls Who Spun Gold, I find myself in an interesting sort of space right now, because I just moved to Atlanta, Georgia in July, and I'm used to photographing people that I know. So I'm really in this interesting space here. But for the Girls Who Spun Gold, I photographed that entire project in Ithaca. And I didn't notice at the time that there was something really important to me about photographing just in that space. Ithaca has this tagline that is 10 square miles surrounded by reality. So this sort of notion that Ithaca is removed from the reality, of our world, that somehow Ithaca, was in this other magical space. And I think, so that's part of like where the magic kind of element comes from in the work, but also speaking back to like this notion that Ithaca is sort of exempt from the problems of the world, which is not true. Like that it, deals with the same issues, racism and issues with housing and gentrification and all of these things. And so that was important to me, for one. But the process was always, the subjects were the girls. And at one point, I also became subject. I thought that it was only right that I also turned the camera on myself. I was at a residency where I wasn't allowed to have visitors, and I started photographing myself. But the process was really always having sort of the model first. I would kind of think of the model and know, who wanted to be photographed, who was free that weekend, who was into like sort of the, my idea for the image, but then really also really being concerned with, like you mentioned, the location. So I was shooting outdoors in Ithaca, different outdoor locations, but also interiors were really important. So, and also like these domestic spaces, like the kitchen, or living rooms. And at one point I had access to this really beautiful home that was almost empty and just had furniture. And so it was like a really big dollhouse for me, which is like my dream, is to just have a house I could play with. But also really thinking about props and what I would kind of consider costume. And then also like a gesture or an action, and like, what is the person doing? But really thinking and making a connection, because you mentioned studio, is as I've, looked at this work more and thought about this work more, really making some connections to some studio or portrait artists like James Van Der Zee, who was photographing during the Harlem Renaissance in Harlem, and really sort of making these elaborate sets and working sort of in the same way that I was thinking about the work. But the ideas would always kind of come to me. And I know it's really an amalgamation of everything, all of my personal experiences, my experiences with the girls, and then sort of like this whole big, vast category of everything I've ever seen, felt, tasted, experienced, which just kind of comes back. So for instance, the photograph that's like Simone with the honey on her belly, it was just like, one day I was like, I knew Simone was pregnant and I was like, I have to photograph her before she has the baby. And it was just like Simone, honey on her belly. And then I was like, and then I need fur coats. And then where am I going to photograph it? And then my friends ended up photographing in my friend's kitchen. And that's kind of how that worked. It's just so important that body of work was just always about collaboration, and always, the willingness of other people to contribute too.
Totally. Those images come across so beautifully because of the spaces that they're in and how they are set up in that way. And it makes those relationships and those intimacies really striking. One of the things, you've mentioned that the props, so some of them came from, for example, that house with the furniture, because I noticed the theme in a few pieces of your work where you have these almost these beautiful type vintage type chairs or sofas that just kind of appear, and sometimes they look really kind of high end, and other times they're maybe more everyday but vintage, and it's such a simple thing, but they really set the scene. They really have a strong context for them.
Thank you. I think I have this natural always interested in things that are vintage. I think that's just me. But then I also kind of had certain rules when I was working, like no shoes. I don't know where it came from, but it's always just been a rule of mine, no shoes. I think part of it is really wanting to not reference one time period exactly, but to be able to kind of permeate through them. Like, for instance, you'll never see like cars in my photographs or stores in the background, or things like that, to just kind of keep the work in this sort of timeless way, but also being connected to time periods, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. And I think also one thing that it does that has just kind of come to me, because when I'm looking at the furniture, I think there's, so with my work, I'm occasionally referencing my own background, and in the 80s in the UK, and the kind of things that were around when we didn't have much money, and so some of the furniture kind of reminds me of that status. But it's like your work, it's almost the backdrops of them kind of remove status as well. The fact that the kind of the costuming, the props, everything else, status is kind of cleared away a bit, so that you're looking more at these intimacies rather than thinking about footwear or, when is this done, and who are these people? What exactly are their backgrounds? That's kind of cleared away.
Yeah, I think that was important to me. And then sometimes to sort of play with it, like, why are these girls in fur coats? Or like, why is she in this fancier, like, just to be able to like touch on that and speak of that notion of class, which is definitely something, that I had to learn how to navigate growing up too.
Yeah. So we've talked quite a bit about Girls Who Spun Gold, but I was also really drawn to two of your other series that are on your website. One being most of it actually. I'm really quite obsessed with your work now. But the Revival series really struck me, and the trouble with being a mama as well, because of the platform that we're recording on as well. So, have you found that being a mother has really influenced your practice as well in terms of the last few years?
Yeah, it just has. I think it's just always, Sally Mann has this great way of saying before that, she doesn't know, if she has this like a really big interest in children, or if, she always photographed her children because she was there. They were just there. Mm-hmm. In the space. And so that's what she had to work with to photograph. But I think there's also maybe this thing in there, because I became a mother so young at 18, that of course my kids were always there, and I've always been taking care of other people sort of, since a really young age. But I also think, I wonder if there is a sense in there, this sort of notion of a bit of like a missed childhood, at the end of that there. But being a mother is just always like, I've just always had to make things work and make it happen. And I remember in grad school, I was working with resin as part of my final, like I was working with resin on like my kitchen table. Like we were like eating at this table, and then I had this resin at this table. But it's just like always this sense of like just having to do so much and just having to make it all work. And I think, kids have always just been subjects. But yeah, I think being a mother is important to my work too, because I really think of this, I became a mom when I was 18, and I had my second child when I was about 24. And I think of like all of the, the troubles that I had to go through and how hard things were sometimes, but really that's literally the fuel for my work. I make work about my experiences, and with no experiences, then I would have no work or no struggle or no. Yeah. So I just think, it's important to the work.
I can really relate to how being a mother can really be productive. So my work isn't usually around the maternal, but I only became a practicing artist after becoming a mother, because I was seeking something and I was seeking a voice, and it came out that way. But it's as you described, it's I've had to make it work in ways that fit around the the childcare hours and the hours that I had brain space when they were younger. And as we are recording now, we're recording after bedtimes, and making it work. And I meet and speak to so many artists who are parents, but it is mostly women who are mothers, who talk about it and who talk about it not usually in terms of sacrifice. I have spoken to many people who talk about sacrifice, but it's more about how they make it work, and how it, even if it's not influencing their direct work, it influences how they work, how they produce, where they produce, size of things, scale, time scales, everything. Yep.
That size of things, that's actually an interesting one. Yeah. I think too, when you speak of sacrifice, I know, it's not something that I think about too much, but I do know at times, and I've heard back from my oldest son is 19 in college here in Atlanta at Morehouse, right next door to me, which is nice. But that sacrifice, those times where they really felt, that I sacrificed for them, but times where they really missed me. Like there's times that I had to miss birthdays or miss big things that were going on, and just really like trying to, I guess, to have them understand and also hold my vision with me. Or I'm just like, okay, this is really hard now, but like, let me put all this work in, and like, I'm going to get somewhere. I'm moving towards something, and really, having faith in that, especially for all those years that I was, a single mom. And just thinking, the sacrifice that children also have to make, for us.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
I would love to know what you're working on at the moment or recently.
Yeah. So, like I said, I just moved to Atlanta. And so I'm in a completely different world. So I'm going from, this predominantly white space into this space where I'm like, everybody is Black. This is amazing. And so I feel like I'm navigating this space right now. And, really, I think because I'm so used to photographing people I know, I feel like I'm in this like really interesting spot where I'm still figuring out who and what I know, and building, relationships. But, I also got married about a year and a half ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And so now I have even more kids, but, so my husband and myself, but also my daughter living with us, and I have a 9-year-old stepson now. And so, what I've really done is turn the camera, on us, and specifically, on my relationship. And so I've started this series, called Sometimes Your Edges Are Rough and I Wrap You in Rainbows.
I saw that as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, really thinking about, trust and, relationships and support and sort of navigating that at this age, and navigating that sometimes with resistance, and so and I guess because that's kind of what my world is now, and I make work about myself and my experiences, and so that's kind of where I am with that work. But I've also been working on video with that work, and having conversations through video. There's a short video that I made. So I'm really just working on expanding that work right now.
Amazing. So I've mentioned that you were one to watch, named one to watch by British Journal Photography, but that's not the only kind of accolade you've had in the last couple of years, is it? You've had several. Would you mind sharing about those, about how that's happened and how that, how that's developed and how that has influenced your journey, I suppose, in the last few years?
Yeah, it's been, I'm going to take it back to, when I was talking earlier about having to leave the girl empowerment group to, focus on my studies and how that felt really selfish. I think the response to my work has been amazing, because in what I thought was being selfish was actually focusing on making this work that I could then open up to the world and other people could experience it. And the response and feedback has been amazing for so many people to see themselves in the work, and have a connection with it and understanding of it and appreciation for it has just been really amazing. And I think, one of the really important things for the work too is also pushing it outside of the US, and so that people all over the world get to see it. And that's really what I'll be focusing on too moving forward, is how to get out into the world more, and so that more people have access to the work. But it's quite an honor to receive, the British Journal One to Watch, and working with World Press Photo, and just having access. I've also gotten to meet a bunch of amazing photographers and see the way that other people are working. And it's just been really a pleasure and an honor, on my behalf. But I'm also really excited for what is to come in the future. I would love also, to keep making my work, but I would love to maybe be shooting different things and shooting other people. And even, I see this sort of crossover into fashion happening that I would love to pursue, making a book of the girls who spun gold. And then just also my video work, just pushing forward with that as well.
That sounds really exciting, Nydia. I am going to be hopefully keeping in touch with you, but definitely watching what you do and, shouting about you. So now I know about you, I will be talking about you and your work wherever I can.
Thank you.
And good luck for everything to come. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Of course. Thank you.
This was Woman Up, the podcast series by Desperate Artwives. I'm Susan Merrick, and I'll speak to you in the next episode.